I think I have good news for you this morning. Though our lesson comes still from the book of John, and it's in chapter 12, the first 11 verses, the lesson is different this morning. So far as I'm concerned, these lessons in John's gospel that we've been in for months now have been extremely intense. But the one this morning deals more with how we live our lives. It deals more with happiness and just not as intense. And so I hope you'll be blessed by what we talk about this morning and hope you'll be encouraged by it. Did you notice the title of the lesson? A Vast Contrast. What I want us to be able to do this morning is I want us to look at these 11 verses. I'm going to read those verses, and I want you to see if you can see what I'm talking about. But before I read them, I want you to remember the space between John chapter 11 and John chapter 12. At the end of John chapter 11, you remember that Lazarus has been dead. He was sick. He died. But Jesus raised him to life again. And what we don't know is how much time has elapsed. Is it days? Weeks? Maybe a few months before you reach the beginning of John chapter 12. All I know for sure is that as you begin John chapter 12, we're just 6 days away from when Jesus will die. Only 6 days away. And so as I read with that understanding, I want you to listen and see if you can imagine what I'm talking about when I say a vast contrast. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him, with Jesus. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found that Jesus was there, and they came, not because of him, but also to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. If you notice that last part, 2 weeks ago, we were making an assumption, or we were at least wondering, when Lazarus had been dead for at least 4 days, was in the grave for 4 days, and he came out of the grave, we wonder how many people lined up, how many people came and asked the question, Lazarus, what was it like? What was it like to be dead, and what's it like now to be alive again? And now we know for sure that people were coming. And many people came out of Jerusalem, many of these Jewish people, and they want to see Lazarus, who was dead and who is now alive, and I would want to see him too. And I'd want to ask the question also. But the problem is, many of them are believing in this Jesus who raised him from the dead. And so the chief priest and their comrades don't want anyone believing in Jesus. And so not only are they planning to kill Jesus, they also now begin to plan to kill Lazarus. But that has nothing to do with the contrast. Did you see the contrast that occurs between how Mary approaches life and how Judas approaches life? That's why I said the lesson's really different. The lessons up at this point have been what I call intense. This one's about how you live your life. So I want you to think about Mary for a moment. And I want you to think in particular about the word gratitude or being grateful. The idea of gratitude or being grateful. Going through life, focusing on how you have been blessed. And may I tell you as I begin, that does not come naturally. That I would every day focus on how I have been blessed. But when I do focus on how I've been blessed, you know what that does for me? That makes my attitude more positive. That makes my attitude more optimistic. That brings more of a smile to my face. It makes me happier. It makes me more attractive to other people. Isn't that interesting? Your attractiveness may not be so much the shape of your face. It may have to do with the attitude that lies within. And focusing on your blessings ultimately leads you to generosity, wherein you are seeing other people who have other needs, and you naturally become generous because you're focused on how you have been blessed. Now that's the story of Mary. Because I don't know how long it's been since Lazarus was raised from the dead. I think at least a few weeks, maybe a few months. Because it says now Jesus has come back to Bethany where Lazarus lived. And Lazarus and Martha and Mary are hosting a dinner in his honor. Now they're really good friends, we know that. We've known from earlier lessons that they love Jesus and Jesus loves them. But why wouldn't they host a dinner? Lazarus had been dead and he had been buried and now he's alive. And while they're at this dinner honoring Jesus out of a spirit of gratitude, look what Mary really does. She takes almost a pint, somewhere around a pint of pure nard, a very expensive perfume. Did you catch in the later reading how expensive it was? About the equivalent in that day of a year's wage. Now, I don't know if you can translate that from then till now, but I know in 2022, the average wage in America was $60,575. Across all of America, the average wage was $60,575. Now, that means that Mary took something of value like that. Do you think that generosity became extravagant? What would it be like? What would it be like to take something worth that much and pour it out on the feet of Jesus and to begin to wipe his feet with her hair? Because once you pour it out of the bottle, it's gone forever. There's no putting it back. You'll never retrieve it. Isn't that interesting? The attitude of not just Mary, but Lazarus and Martha. This was probably a family treasure. It was probably something they've saved for a long time. but they give it all away. Because that's what gratitude does for you. When you focus on your blessings, you smile more. When you focus on your blessings, you're more optimistic and you're more positive and you're more attractive. And Mary and Martha and Lazarus are doing that. Now, let me tell you again, I know from experience that does not come for me naturally. Does it for you? Do you naturally count your blessings every once in a while at least? Oh, it's much easier for me to focus on all the difficulties and all the problems and all the struggles and all the things about politics I don't like and all the things about this and that I don't like. And I can get myself in such a stew that I never think about how I've really been blessed. Well, look at the other character, Judas. Did you see what Judas was really like? Now, the interesting thing is, both are believers in Jesus. Both believe in Jesus. Both Mary and Judas saw Lazarus dead and then saw Lazarus alive. Both believe. But one is overwhelmed with gratitude, and the other has this problem that so easily creeps into my life and your life called greed. And the reason why it comes so naturally is greed is linked to selfishness and self-centeredness. It's an intense form of selfishness. And so greed kind of has this belief that the more I get, the better life will be. And so greed so easily turns into criticism of other people and jealousy of other people. And it so easily turns into deceit or flattery. Flattery is a form of deceit. Flattery, remember, is a compliment I give to you for my good. I'm trying to get you on my side somehow. And then greed will go farther. And it will cause you to literally take what you shouldn't take. And so look what it says really about Judas. Read this with me. Judas, who was later to betray him, objected. Now, that means this next statement's a criticism. He objected. Well, what are you doing? Why didn't you take this perfume and sell it so we could give it to the poor? Now that sounds very noble, doesn't it? Greed will mask itself over like that. It sounds very, very noble. But God's not going to let us get fooled in this passage. He didn't say it because he cared for the poor. He was the treasurer of the group. He kept the money bag. And he would take a little bit out for himself. That's how greed kind of works. That's why I like our collection basket back at the back. We don't pass it around the audience. So in our closing prayer, I go back to the back. And while you have your heads bowed and your eyes closed, I thumb through there and see how much cash is in there, and I take some out and put it in my pockets, and it works really well. I mean, it's just a pretty neat deal. No, that's a joke, everybody, okay? That's a joke. But that's what Judas would do. That's how Judas worked the system. Now, you tell me how it worked out for Judas. Did Judas live a happy life? Was it a good life? Do you know that later he'll be so consumed by what he has? Now, don't take that lightly. I'm telling you that people in this world are so focused on what they do and what they have, they never pay attention very much to who they are. Everybody get that? People are so enamored by what they do and what they have, they pay little attention to who they are. He's not paying attention to what's happening to him. 6 days from now, you know what he does? He will sell the identity of Jesus for 30 coins, 30 pieces of silver. Did that make him happy? No. In the end, he takes his own life. He takes his own life. I'm telling you, if I'm focusing only on things and possessions and thinking that if I get more and more, life's going to get better and better, I'm not paying attention to life. So how did Jesus feel about all this? We'll look at these next verses. You leave her alone. You leave her alone. He didn't like any part of what Judas was saying. You leave her alone. They kept this. She kept this ointment. It was intended for the day of my burial. And I'm going to tell you something, Judas. You're always going to have the poor with you. And you ought to take care of the poor, is the idea. But I'm not going to be here very long. I'll not always be here. She's done a really good thing. She's done a really special thing, Judas. And so now I come to this point in the lesson and I wonder, which is it for me? More gratitude or more greed? Because I'm going to tell you, I have a bit of greed in me. I have a bit of too much desire for things in me. And it is so easy for it to grow and consume me and get totally out of hand and destroy everything else that matters. And so the articles we read all the time, don't we? All the time we read about people who are close to death and they're asked what really matters. And they say, I wish I'd have spent more time with what? My family. And more time doing this or that. And it'll never talk about work. It'll never talk about possessions. And I can tell you that I want to be more of the gratitude person. But it's not easy. That song we sing, Count My Many Blessings, Name Them One by One. I don't do that very well, do you? But if I stop and think about how I've been truly blessed through the day and through the week, and I really think about, wow, though I don't like some of what's happening in our country, isn't it a great place to live? And though I don't like some of the things that I see in this little town, isn't it a great place to live? And though there are some things about a job I may not like, isn't it great to have a job? Or isn't it wonderful to have had a job and be retired now? And I'm able to get up and walk this morning and maybe even move a little faster than walking. And isn't it wonderful to feel this good? And 18 years ago today, we were having a giant party at our house in Lubbock, Texas. We had people coming from many, many states away. And there were 70 or 80 people in our backyard. At least they were supposed to arrive in our backyard. And we leave them. We leave them. They're there by themselves. Somebody else takes care of the party. Because Susan and I race away from Lubbock, Texas and get here because over at Weatherford, Our grandson was being born, our first grandson, 18 years ago today. What a blessing. What a blessing to be able to have that grandson. And we'll celebrate with him tonight. And that'll be fun. And between now and tonight, I'll probably encounter several things I don't like. And which do I choose to focus on? Because I remind you once again of this principle. Remember, I do principles. 60 or 70 leadership principles I teach and I live by. What you focus on grows. What you focus on gets larger and larger in your life. And what you focus on, therefore, will consume you. And if I focus on how I've been blessed, I start smiling more, and I become more optimistic, and I become more positive, and I become more attractive, and people like me. Which do you like better, Mary or Judas? Which do you like better? You don't like Judas. What's that old Christmas movie, The Christmas Carol? It's got the character in it named Scrooge. And for most of the movie, you don't like Scrooge because he's like Judas. He thinks that more and more and more will make him happier and happier and happier, and it does not work, and thankfully he learns the difference. Did I tell you this lesson was different? Did I tell you it's not the typical John lesson? Because the Gospel of John is written that we might believe in Jesus. But here in this little tiny corner of the 12th chapter, he says, there are two ways to live your life. One is broad, and most people travel it. It's the road of greed. Focusing on what you have and what you do. But the people who walk a narrower road, it's more difficult. They focus on who they are and how they've been blessed. Isn't that interesting? So which do you choose? Now we're going to pause and take the Lord's Supper. Because it is a supper of remembering, and it's a supper of gratitude. Because we wouldn't be here had Jesus not come. We would not be here unless Jesus was willing to give his life. We wouldn't be here unless Jesus was raised from the dead himself by the power of God. And so maybe I can start my day today by being really grateful for a moment for the one who made it possible.